we're going to get into ultimately the 4 reasons why women with high body count should possess a huge red flag for you. And then we're going to talk about what to do when you find out or get into a situation with a woman that has a high body count, right? So here's the first reason that a woman with a high body count is a huge red flag. As we said this whole show so far, trauma. Most women that have high body counts, again, I'm not trying to generalize, so not all, but a lot of women that have high body counts, it correlates with they had a traumatic childhood and they're trying to rectify that by having a lot of men on them so they can feel some kind of love in some kind of way. Now, unfortunately, they come to usually find out later that going that pathway doesn't actually really make them feel more loved. If anything, it ends up making them, like when they get into their late 30s and 40s, it makes them feel used. It makes them feel abused. It makes them feel like they really didn't have any self-worth. By that time, a lot of women that have had high body counts also end up having kids by some of these random men that they're no longer with. So now they're putting the child through that kind of trauma and having, no father figure around like they probably didn't have and stuff like that. Like it all boils down to there's some level of trauma. And the sad part is most of the women won't tell you what the trauma is about. It could be a plethora of things. I talk to plenty of women now. The amount of traumatic things that unfortunately can happen to women in their lifetime prior to them meeting you is astronomically higher than men's. Like most men's trauma is like, oh, like girls wouldn't talk to me when I was little. And, and to be fair, guys also come from like abusive households and stuff like that. But women overall, like from a young age, they're getting touched inappropriately. They're getting hollered and hooted at. If they're in the household, they're being talked down upon. If their dad left, they're not getting that father figure they need. They're getting all kinds of random abuse from the mother. Or if they have both parents in the home, maybe they're getting touched in weird, odd ways, or they're just going through situation with other relatives and stuff like that. Like there's just a whole list of traumatic things that can happen to a woman that she will not tell you about. And all you'll see is the after effects, which is she's hooking up with a lot of people. But if you are interested in a woman that seems to have a high body count, you need to do your due diligence. You need to really figure this woman out and figure out her story, figure out what's going on with her, what's her family life been like, what's her past been like, because these are the kind of women that if it's because of results of trauma, they're going to bring that trauma into the relationship. The way they react to things, the way that they interact with you on a regular basis is going to reflect that trauma. But you can get a red flag for that and see that early on by knowing what her body count is. The second reason to avoid women with a high body count is because they are not showing that they have proper coping skills. As you said with the last lady, right? When she go through a breakup, the way she would try to combat the feeling of that is by hooking up with a whole bunch of dudes, thinking that it was going to help her. So what that says is that these women that have high body counts, part of it could be they're doing it as a way to try to cope with some kind of injustice they feel in their life or not getting their way or some kind of other thing whereby it's a negative thing that's going on in their life. And rather than deal with that negative thing in a proper way, their response is, I'm going to go hook up. But again, this is bad for when she gets into a relationship with you and you guys have a little tiff going on. What's going to be her response? Is she going to be able to sit there with you and calmly talk to you about what's bugging her, what the situation is that's causing her to feel a certain way? Or is she going to say, well, this guy doesn't get me, so I feel bad right now, and I don't know how to talk to him about it, so I'm going to go hook up with somebody else, and maybe that'll make me feel better. And then she does it, and it doesn't make her feel better, and now she's cheating on you, so now she feels 2 bad things. So you want to get with a woman that ideally is showing you that she knows how to properly cope with things in life when they're not going her way. A woman that has a high body count is showing you up front that the way she copes with things is by hooking up and not necessarily with the person that she's having a disagreement with, but with somebody else that's going to be her deflecting action until she is able to figure out how to handle you. And that to me is a no bueno situation. The third reason that you as a guy should avoid dating women with high body counts and treat it as a red flag is that kind of behavior is going to possibly pass on to the children. Like whatever value she has early on in life are going to pass on to the children. Now, some of you guys that are dating in your 20s and 30s, you're not going to see this. Again, I'm 41. I've been around enough women from back in the day that were a little loose. And now fast forward to they're older and they have kids that are also hitting those teenage years. And a lot of the ways in which the mom was is starting to be the way in which the daughter was. So to the point, for example, right? Let's say we go back to example 1, the mother went through trauma, right? So that means that her interaction, if you look at the video I showed with Black China, That's the interaction that she had with her mom, was them fighting back and forth, yelling, cursing, and screaming, right? So now she has kids. Can you imagine how Blac Chyna is talking to her kids? I can imagine she's probably also yelling and screaming and all that stuff with them, right? So those kind of values get passed on. So you don't think that a mom that was extra promiscuous or didn't have proper coping skills and cope with it by hooking up with other people isn't going to get pass that on to her potential daughter that she has with you? Like, these are things that if she's not being able to handle herself and get that situated to where she gets past that trauma, then it's like, I don't think parents often realize that their kids are watching them. And so she's going to start hearing stories about mommy and how she was really loose back in the day and how, oh, it was just freedom of expression and did what she wanted to do. Well, your daughter could now end up being that same exact way. The question is, do you want that to happen? Because that's going to be an influence. Now, there's going to be people that say, but Harry, but what if the dad was promiscuous in his younger days and blah, 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 blah. Again, this isn't trying to say it's good for men to do either, but it is saying that women typically have an influence on women, and the first woman that your daughter's going to see is her mom. Do you want that to be the influence that she has on your potential young daughter? Just things to think about. And then the fourth reason to potentially avoid women with a high body count and see it as a red flag is self-sabotage. You saw the girl, like I said, the girl you saw, the last one, you saw Brittany Renner talking about how, like, they thought that it was a good idea to try to get over their trauma by trying to hook up with a whole lot of people. And then they found out it didn't work. But all that hooking up did was self-sabotage them. It self-sabotaged their emotions. It self-sabotaged their ability to really connect with somebody. As you saw with the picture that I showed earlier, where the girl was talking about how, you know, she can try to love later on, but it just gets harder to do and you have less compassion. Like, these are women saying this. This isn't me, Harry, coming on here and saying, as a guy, I think women, blah, 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 blah. These are women that are showing you and telling you that they were actually doing things to self-sabotage themselves that they recognize in hindsight. But you don't want to get a woman that's going to recognize in 15 years from now, oh, all the stuff I was doing with you back in the day, I was just self-sabotaging myself. Like, no, you want a woman ideally right now that is like, I already recognize that this is probably not the best thing to do and that I need to figure out alternative ways to deal with life's hardships, because as Kevin used to always say, like, the world does not owe you understanding. I love that quote. It's a very great quote because it's true. It's like, you want to get with a woman ideally that has less trauma or has done the things she needs to do to actively get through that trauma, to not bring it so heavily into the relationship. All right. Now, with all that said, let's say you meet a woman and you're dating her and you haven't had the, high body count talk. Cause to be fair on this show, I've talked about how, like, I don't typically ask women about their body counts of the past. Not that I don't think it's that important, but it's like, I understand that sometimes you need to really observe a person before you get into how the number of bodies they had in the past is going to determine where they're at now. And the reality is, as much as I've talked about the trauma and stuff like that, the reality is there are women out there that have had high body counts that have done the work on themselves to realize that wasn't the right way to do things, and have changed up and have been actively showing for several years that they don't operate in that old way of thinking. Those are the kind of women where if they had a high body count, I could be a little judgmental early on, but be like, okay, but let's take time to actually date and see where this goes. Let me see, how it is when we fight and yada, yada, yada. So to that, I say this. Let's say you meet a woman and you find out, say 3 months in, oh, she had like whatever you consider to be a high body count. I know that's a very controversial thing. Some guys think like, oh, it's like 5 bodies and I'm out. And some guys are like, she had 100 bodies, but she's experienced. So it really depends on how you're going to feel about that. But let's say, for the argument's sake, you find out she has a high body count that you are not cool with. All right. Here's the thing that you do. If you really feel like this could really be a thing, you think that she's like your perfect match and the chemistry's there, but you're worried about this body count thing, this is why it's good for you to take your time in dating, because it's not so much about the body count as it relates to, what that body count is saying about the trauma she's had in the past and her ability to have gotten over it. So if she has a high body count, first you want to figure out, okay, really figure out her family backstory, figure out what she went through as a kid, if anybody did anything to her that caused her to want to rack up this high body count. Maybe she's just sexually free and really is just like, I just have a slightly higher testosterone level and want to bang everything moving, and I wasn't caring about relationships back in the day, yada, yada, yada. Again, these aren't good things, but you want to get the full story. So let's say she says, oh yeah, I realized I had a traumatic past and stuff like that, and the family this and that, and I don't really, whatever. Okay, find out that story, okay? From there, figure out what has she done since that story to better herself? Has she been in therapy? Maybe she found out she was bipolar and she got on some type of, drug regimen to where she can regulate herself and not be so radically free. Maybe she was able to, meet up with whoever did stuff with her in the past and have a reconciliation to where she felt better. But figure out what she's done about those traumas to get past those traumas, and then ask about the actual work she's been doing since then to make sure she doesn't relapse back into that kind of behavior that you were finding not acceptable. All right. And then from there, again, when you take your time dating and you move slowly versus trying to rush into stuff, you'll be able to catch these things early on, but then really see how she is in various high pressure situations, meeting your family, getting into your guys' first few arguments, which is inevitably going to happen. When those things happen, see how she reacts to them. See if she's, keeping messages on her phone. See if she's like keeping Instagrams where she's letting a lot of dudes like her stuff, and see how she's presenting herself on social media. Is she the woman that's always posing in bikinis and wearing skimpy outfits to try to get likes from men? I got news for you. That is just as bad as her having a high body count, because she's trying to vie for attention outside of a relationship that she doesn't actually need. All right. So you look at all these things collectively and say, based on the trauma that I know about, based on the work that she says she's doing, based on how she's presenting herself today, based on, what other men she has in her life and how she's trying to connect with them or not connect with them based on her social media, even if she has a high body count, do these other things that she has going on allow me to want to continue to stay with her, or are continuing to be red flags that indicate outside of the high body count, she's ultimately not a good mate? Because I don't want to come in here and say women that have high body counts are all bad. I don't think inactively that's true any more than I don't think that guys that have all these high body counts are great or bad either. It's just sometimes situations happen in life, but those actions can be very indicative of the kind of behavior she could bring into a relationship. And I don't want you to get trapped by a woman that had a high body count, which was indicative of traumas, which was indicative of not having coping skills, which is indicative of having certain values that you don't want to pass on to your children, and that are indicative of her being the kind of woman that's going to try to self-sabotage her life, which is then going to affect you. All right, guys? So hopefully this gives you guys some clarity. Again, I didn't want to go into the whole pair bonding and blah, 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 because those have been dead. Those have been spoken to death. But I do think it's important to look at the reasons behind why a person is making certain decisions, high body count being one of those in women. All right.
You's a bad boy, but you can't stop, won't stop. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high class man. You a high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class